reaction from readers. I think one of the things that I found really interesting is that it's a book that has resonated not just with people of African or Caribbean or heritage, but with everybody. I've had people who come from Europe or South America or other parts of the world talking about how much they identified with this idea of having two cultures and having to navigate two cultures and figuring out who you are in that process. So for me, I think it's been just so gratifying. I also love the fact that people believe in the characters so much that they hate some of them and want to punch their lights out. Because to me, that means they've bought into the story. They've actually read it and believed it. And for a writer, that's the greatest compliment, really. One of the things that I get a lot of feedback to the book is it's very easy to read, it's very light, it's very cleanly written, as somebody said. And I mean, that's my preferred style of reading, so it's my preferred style of writing. I'm not a writer who spends a lot of time drowning sentences with metaphors and doing the traditional literary thing, particularly when it comes to African writing, because I like to focus on the story. I'm really into dialogue and understanding and developing the characters through dialogue. And the sorts of books that I enjoy reading very much do that and tell the story, rather than perhaps sometimes I feel get very self-indulgent about the use of language. So that's one of the things that I hear a lot. Oh, it's very easy reading, it's great beach reading and all of that, which I have no problems with. Chick lit, call it whatever you want. But I think the important thing is that it does raise very deep and serious issues. It raises issues around identity, around belonging, around culture. It does talk about the poverty in Ghana. It talks about the frustration and the lack of opportunity that there is for people who are not blessed to live in economically, better households. So all those things are not ignored. And it's also, part of it is also set in the rural part of the country. So I think it manages to do a bit of a whistle-stop tour over some of the elements of Ghanaian contemporary culture and life. And I stress contemporary because, again, this is a book for me, about Ghana today and about Africans today. And I'm not really interested in retelling the story of, colonialism and the sorts of the negative sides of our cultures, all those things which exist. I think that's been told and talked about many, many times. I want to focus on the bit that really doesn't get reported and talked about, and that is, today's Africans who are very cosmopolitan, many of them, very middle class, exposed to the same sorts of media, news, activities, art, fashion, as everywhere else in the world. And I think the characters that predominate within this book come from those worlds. And therefore, I think for some people, if they're looking for a read that's going to reinforce the very monochromatic stories of Africa and almost the stereotypes of this poverty-stricken continent, that's not the book you're going to be wanting to read, because that's not where the focus lies. There was one particular book club that I had a meeting with the leader of the book club and was given feedback about what the book club members had thought. And she said it was it was the most debated book out of the books they'd read since they started the club. And one of the reasons was because 2 or 3 of the members had read other African literature and were expecting to get similar African literature when they read this book. Now, the cover alone should tell you that this isn't a book that's going to be typical African literature, whatever that is, because it's not a book that focuses on people who grow up and are going through experiences within Africa and then therefore coming outside, comparing those experiences with the West. This is very much a story of somebody who's grown up in the West, and that's the pastor, and who moves to the East, or moves to Africa, which is the Pigfoot. And it's that journey, and it's that different. So the root culture, if you like, for the protagonist is the West. And that's where her environment is, and that's where the people she interacts are, and that's where the people she goes to stay with in Ghana are also rooted. So I think some people were feeling that this wasn't deep enough, this wasn't culture enough. And I think one interesting outcome of that discussion was to discuss what is African culture. And one of the questions I put to the person I was speaking to was, if someone's talking about London culture or Rio culture or, Paris culture, I don't think they're talking about just going to Big Ben. I don't think they're talking about just going up the Eiffel Tower. I think they're talking about going to the clubs. I think they're talking about going to the restaurants. I think they're talking about seeing the different festivals that take place, listening to the music, because that represents culture today. It's not just about the history. And yet somehow there's this idea that when it comes to Africa and these so-called exotic places, culture is all about the past, and that's what culture represents. And the people that are living life today and going out and doing their jobs and running banks and running industries and setting up music companies and these aren't culture. These are just sort of people to be noticed but sidelined. And I disagree entirely with that. I think our culture is based on today, on tomorrow, on yesterday. And it's those elements of society that I wanted to focus on, and I want to focus on in my writing. People like you and me. So I'm not really writing about people that I don't recognise and I don't resonate with. I'm writing about people that are there in their vast numbers, but to me, I don't read about them. I don't read books about people like me. And I know many people like me who also, as a result, don't read books about people like them. So that's where I think perhaps my niche is. I have had people in Ghana reading it. It hasn't yet been fully distributed in Ghana, so people that have bought it tend to have bought it either abroad or through Kindle. It's also available on Kindle. And interestingly, the comments have been so positive, and also I've learnt a lot I didn't know about my own country, which I thought was really great. So yes, I think definitely distribution in Ghana and across Africa is definitely something that the publishers are looking to do. So we're all working on that. I have been doing a lot of book readings, and I will continue to do those as we move into the new year. At the moment, the book is available in some bookshops. It's available in some Waterstones and some W.H. Smiths, but it's definitely available on Amazon.co.uk. And anyone who wants to go on there can read the reviews. They're mostly great, except for one that I still have an issue with. Yeah, you can get it on there. And any problems, get back to me.